Managers, what is the silliest reason you have had an employee call in sick? A friend of mine, when he was in his early 20s, called in drunk. Friend, I can't come in. I'm a pretty drunk. Boss, oh, you're sick and can't come in? Friend, nah, I'm just drunk. Can't make it. Boss, no, you're sick. Right? Friend, nah man, I'm just kinda drunk. Boss, okay, I'm putting you down as sick. Get better soon. Called in horny. Obligatory, not a manager. He was trying for a baby. Couple was deemed infertile, going through all sorts of treatments and therapies. Dude calls into the manager and says his wife is ready. Manager told him to take the day off. A few months later they confirmed conception past 12 weeks. It was very exciting, but also strange. I'm not a manager, but I'm a floor installer, and I run my own crew from time to time. We had this one guy who is constantly complaining about how broke he is, and how he needs to work so badly, and yet he just didn't ever want to actually show up. Here's a selection of my favorite of his excuses. There was a construction truck parked blocking his driveway. I thought, why not ask them to move? Someone had allegedly been messing with him and slowly letting the air out of his tires. Clearly they couldn't possibly be leaking. They were only 5 years old. Someone had broken into his vehicle under cover of night, removed the motor that operates the windows, and replaced it with a burnt out one on the driver's side, so now his window barely works. I mean, the car's only about 13 years old. Couldn't be wearing out by itself. We offered this dude a full-time job, with a guaranteed permanent position, if he proves himself. He proved that he would rather come up with any reason to not work. Had a lady call in and say she couldn't come into work because everything was wrong. I asked her to elaborate. She said Venus was retrograde with Mercury, and because she is a Capricorn she is vulnerable and can't come into work as everything is terrible. I'm like, you are trying to call off work because your horoscope is wrong? She screamed, OMG, I knew you wouldn't understand. You are such an ass, and slammed the phone on me. She didn't last long. Mine is about a girl who called in sick with a cold and sore throat. On their return to work I asked if it had been started or caused by work, expecting them to say no. Instead they said yes. Surprised, I asked them to explain. Well, I was making a pot noodle in the kitchen, and the window was open. So as I was opened the sachet of powder, the wind blew through the window and all the power went down my throat, hence my cold and sore throat. I've got back pain because I fell off the back of a motorcycle. That's fine mate, come in when you're well. The doctor said it could be the motorcycle, or it could be my office chair. Okay, well, if we're waiting on the results from the blood test, you're taking a blood test to see if your back pain is from sitting in an old chair or falling off a motorcycle? Yes. He just kept going until it was obvious he was laying. Not in a managing position, but man, I do love the stuff I hear in the office. During lunch break there was this overweight lady discussing something with a coworker. I didn't pick up the conversation, but all I heard was, your hate and negativity against me are so painful I might throw up. Half an hour later I hear from her boss that she threw up in the restroom and had to go home since she doesn't feel safe right now. Dude then asked me if I know anything, and I said no as I didn't want to get involved. He further asks how often I have been sick in the last 3 years. Tell him I have no recorded sick days in the last 3 years, and he just goes, wow, that must be hard. I'm like, TF. Not actually a silly reason to work, but still it's kind of related. I work at a small fast food restaurant, and it has very few staff, way too few, if you ask me. I cover a lot of shifts for my boss, like sometimes twice a week. I called in sick one day, and no one could cover my shift. My boss managed to convince one of my co-workers to cover 1/3 of my shift. He then told me I owe him one. Fuck off mate, you owe me way more than I owe you. This doesn't count, because I ended up going in. Not proud of it, but my boss and I got a hearty laugh. I was a landscaper back in my later teens. I had gotten drunk the night before with my buddies because the forecast said tons of rain in the morning. I get home and pass out, get a phone call in morning from my boss asking where I was. Nearly comatose, I say, it's raining, isn't it? He laughs and says, get to work. I told him my night and my thought process. He laughed even harder. It was a good day with a hangover as well. I used to work at a trampoline park, and we had one guy who was super greedy when taking parties. He called the store one day and would only speak to me since I was his favorite manager. He asked if there were any parties assigned to him, and I said no. He then replied with, "I'm not coming in. I don't feel too good." I told my general manager, and he said bullshit, and wrote him up for it. My 4-year-old daughter came out into the yard to watch me install a chain link fence. It involved digging lots of post holes in the harder stone red clay in Alabama in August. It was hot. She sat on a block of concrete and just watched as the sweat beaded up on her brow. I wondered why she didn't at least move over to the shade, or maybe sit inside in the account and watch through a window. Eventually I asked her what she was doing. "Supervising." "Do you know what supervising means?" She sighs. "Mostly it means being very patient." A girl called in once because she had gotten back from vacation on Saturday and she needed another day to recover. It was Monday. She was PRN and made her own schedule. She would also ask if she could come in a couple hours late. She worked as a tech in a hospital, so she would relieve someone else. Not a manager, but a team lead. Problem I have is getting too much info from those calling in sick. Really just emails or IMs no one calls anymore. At my company you're not required to disclose the reason for taking the time, as long as you have it. Can't tell you how many times people start describing their effed up medical problems, and I'm just thinking please stop, I don't need to know. The vast majority are from our folks in our remote center in India. Some examples. I have an open sore on my face, some sort of fungus. My throat is swollen, and I'm coughing up pus. I'm having uncontrollable bowel movements. Oh, I just had a good sick versus vacation day lie a few weeks ago. Not necessarily an excuse, but just a straight up lie. I run the rental department for a group of heavy duty truck dealerships, box trucks, 18-wheelers, dump trucks, school buses, etc. Which means I end up going to the DMV a lot to get tags for new rental trucks, etc. I also have my 2 of my own separate shops from the rest of the dealership to work on my own trucks and my own trucks only. One Monday, I had a young, new mechanic call into my shop manager saying he'd caught a stomach bug over the weekend, wasn't feeling much better yet, hadn't slept, etc. Shop manager tells me he's out, my guys do the best they can, while down a mechanic. After lunch that day, I go to DMV to title and register 2 new trucks. Side note, in bigger towns, DMV will occasionally have separate windows for dealers and another for large fleets. Who do I see in the line for the general public registering his new crotch rocket? Guy who called in sick. I just called out his name quietly and waved, and told him I was glad he felt better. He used to call out sick every once in a while on a Monday. We usually assumed he was sleeping off a bender. Anyway, he hasn't called in sick on a Monday since then. I'm a manager, but my own boss calls in sick so frequently that we don't even ask why anymore. Oh, Devin is sick. Shocker. In the last 2 months he's had the chicken pox and like 3 colds. The kicker is that when I try to call out, happened once, I had a bad fever. He guilts me into working. He does the same to my employees. I also have an employee who goes home early all the time, once a week or so, because her daughter starts fights at school. So either she's lying, or her daughter is a very violent 4-year-old and someone should be concerned. One of my employees was arrested for drug dealing, and I got another employee to cover his shift. The covering employee never showed up, never replied to calls or texts. I was worried enough that I had hours to a wellness check with their family. Turns out, she had car trouble that morning, well before her shift, which was also resolved well before her shift, but she was so angry over it, she just decided she couldn't work and didn't want to talk to anyone. So she just didn't answer her phone. I fired both employees. It was a rough week. 2 from me as the employee and not the manager. I got bit by my cat and had to go to the ER. I spent all night there. I had to get all sorts of IV antibiotics. I called my boss the next morning saying I couldn't come in for a cat bite. He said, "You are not coming in because a cat bite." Whatever. Click, I come in the next day all bandaged up and he is apologizing. His wife is a nurse, and when he got home and told the story she yelled at him. and explained how serious it could be. The day prior I went tubing down a river and didn't put sunscreen on my legs and I'd get a bad sunburn. I can hardly stand or walk, it hurts so much. There is only me and another girl who do the job we do. She works AM and I PM. If one calls in sick they have to work a double. So I call in sick for a sunburn. She is like, whatever, it's kinda BS, but I'll cover for you. I come in the next day in shorts and sandals because I could not have pants touching my legs. Totally against dress code. She sees how bad the sunburn is and says, holy shit. I didn't realize how bad it was. Do you want to go home? It was me. I phoned work to tell them I wouldn't be in because I had locked myself in my house. I had just moved house that weekend. Didn't yet have a key for the back door, locked the front door Sunday evening from the inside, and went to bed. Woke up Monday morning, turned the key in the lock and it just sheared off, leaving the door locked from the inside with remains of the key in the hole. Had to ring up the letting agent and get them to come let me out with their spare key. Was 4 hours late to work. There was much piss taking when I got to work. Some of my favorites when I was a manager. I can't come in today cause it's too windy and I can't drive my car. I can't come in today because my cell phone broke and I need to go buy a new one. Calling from my friend's phone. I can't come in because I missed the bus and being an hour late won't be worth the money I'd make being there on time. I can't come in today because my work pants ripped and I don't have any other pairs. You can just wear normal pants today. No, that wouldn't be professional and fair to you. He wanted to take paid leave for a Friday. I knew his favorite band was in town that Friday and their concert would start right around the time work was set to get out. Instead I put him on 24 hours sick time, basically paid time off, and the company only starts tracking it if it exceeds 24 hours, and told him to enjoy the concert. I used the old food poisoning reason. Real reason was I had an interview at a different company. What I didn't know was 3 other coworkers had interviews at different companies on the same day. 2 of them also had food poisoning and one was my kid got sick. Quite hilarious the next day when our boss asked what or where we ate, or named 3 different foods 3 different places. I'm sure he knew something was up as he just laughed at us. Obligatory, not a manager, but going to tell on myself for a silly out sick reason. I once had to call out sick because my mother brought home a puppy, set it on my lap, where he fell asleep, and then left to go out shopping, and I didn't know when she'd be back. I wasn't really a dog person, and I was the only one home, and this was a brand new animal in the house that I had to keep out of things, so I called in because I had a puppy asleep on my lap. My boss was less than thrilled that was my reason, but the way I saw it, I had little other choice. The dog didn't have a crate or anywhere I'd feel safe leaving him for 5 minutes, let alone 5 hours. Still kept my job and got to explain the situation better when I went in the next day. Boss was initially angry on the phone, but with more context and a chat with his wife, and he understood a bit better. Bonus icing on the shitty cake to that day, the puppy woke up at some point and started making a low grumbly noise. I didn't know what he was doing, so I brought him over to my bed to pet him and check him over, make sure he was okay. He needed to pee, so he pissed on my bed. Fuck's sakes. Me, as an employee, called into the office and had to explain that I would be very late. A flock of starlings had gotten into a patch of berries and shat all over my car. It was bad enough I had to wash the windshield before I could drive. My boss, probably thinking bullshit, nope, bird shit, drives to my house and sees me scrubbing the windows, stops, pauses, laughs hysterically, then drives away. I didn't have time to wash the car until later that day. It was horrible. Black Friday in a big box retailer. Employee calls in about 25 minutes before we open on cell phone because they can't get through on the store phones. Imagine that. Says I'm not going to make it tonight, I have to take my mom's dog to the vet. For those of you that haven't worked retail in a big box, every employee works Thanksgiving/Black Friday weekend in our location. We even have district and market managers that come into stores and sell. Our company even does dry runs prior to BF earlier in the month. where everyone comes in, and the shift that isn't working role players customers to ensure we don't screw up line management. Said employee no longer works there. I called out one day to my shitty job at a call center because my sandal broke while I was walking there lol. I can't walk the rest of the way barefoot. I didn't give a shit about that job, and the day I finally quit I just walked out in the middle of my shift. Also at a different job, I gave my friend a good reference and she ended up getting hired. Well, that was a huge mistake because she was a terrible employee and called out all the time. One day she called in saying she couldn't come in because she had gone to the cabin for the weekend and decided to stay longer. She got fired after like 2 months. I was managing the biggest Wendy's in my mall, which was over 9 staff, and one day I felt so sick, woke up with actually a poo in my bed and thought, oh god no way, that's so gross. When I got into work I drink a whole bottle of Pepto-Bismol and it'd make my stomach way worse actually, so I start to burp a lot and ask Ricky if he can be the manager for today. I'm simply too ill to deal with the day-to-day operations of the largest Wendy's in my mall. Well, the next day I get a call and Ricky says, gigs up bitch, I'm the manager now boy, so don't come in. Had an employee call in sick, saying it was the flu. An hour later, he checked in at George Webb, Milwaukee restaurant chain, on Facebook, and posted a photo of himself standing in a line outside of the restaurant that was 3 or 4 blocks long, waiting for a free hamburger that the restaurant was giving away because the Milwaukee Brewers won 12 games in a row. He's 30, by the way. I'm not a manager, but I did once have a weird reason for calling off. My car died right as I was pulling into my garage. My neighbor had to help me push it in the rest of the way. My girlfriend lent me her car to take to work. I drove down to the corner station to top off the tank. Her car died at the gas station. This was at about 9 PM on a Saturday. No rental place was open. No one I could call for a ride or borrow another car. Had to call off because I had no way of getting there. People thought I was calling off to get a 3-day weekend. Couldn't make it to her 4 AM to 8 AM shift because of church. Similarly, couldn't make it to her 12 AM to 4 AM shift because her family was in town. These were 2 separate women. I highly doubt Jesus or your mother want to spend time with you that early in the morning.